Judge Merritt, back to the time when you were appointed judge and then thereafter, how did becoming a judge change your relationship with other lawyers that you knew, with whom you had practiced or otherwise?
Well, it didn't change my relationship with close friends much at all, I don't think. With lawyers generally, you know, you're looked upon as a judge. They don't want to discuss certain things with you, and there's a little bit of more arm's length, maybe. But the Court of Appeals, unlike the Supreme Court, is more or less an anonymous court. So, and it's somewhat clerical. It's like joining the priesthood to some extent, because thank God I no longer have to or can make political contributions. And you may not solicit people to give to things, and that's a blessing in a way. Of course, it's one of the things that's part of our civilization that puts people in contact with each other, but there's more of a kind of anonymity than there would be if you were perhaps more active in the community, and the canons of judicial ethics prevent a lot of activities that you might otherwise be involved in. But even with that, it allows you to lead a somewhat more scholarly, I think, thoughtful, where you're not jumping around every day having to do this or that, you know. So it's a balance, and it has its upsides and its downsides.
Sometimes it's said that courts of appeals judges are insulated, possibly even too insulated. Do you think they are?
Can be, yes. I think you have to stay in touch with people to some extent, and that's somewhat hard to do oftentimes.
What about the increased security that goes with being a judge now?
Too much security. We've closed down the courthouses, you know, and all of that. I'm not sure that all the security, I mean, the Supreme Court has security up one side and down the other. The thought is that we're going to get bombed any day now if we don't have all this security. The judiciary, when I was chief judge to begin with, spent very little money on security. They spend huge amounts of money on security now. And without knowing in detail everything, my overall impression is we've gone somewhat overboard about the security, but there's a lot of security.
How has the growth in technology affected the way you operate on the Court of Appeals?
Well, all the law clerks now, all the younger lawyers, the way they deal with legal research is on the computer and LexisNexis, Westlaw, etc. And they don't do it anything like I learned to do legal research in school and did for years. And there is a difference in conceptualization that takes place with respect to how you do research on a computer and how you do research in the West key number system. And in the West key number system, you've got topics, subtopics, you've got principles that you have to put in your head in order to do the research and find the case law or whatever. That is quite different than doing research by putting in keywords, because the keyword, there may be some conceptualization in that, but it's very different. And so I think both of them lead to slightly different consequences and slightly different ways people think about the law. But listen, I've got two male law clerks and a female law clerk right now. My female law clerk's been with me for 15 years. She's great. And the two have been with me for 1 year now. They're leaving this week. And they do all their research on the computer, and they are brilliant kids, much smarter than I was when I got out of law school. Now, they're both kind of founders medalist type, like you were, so they're good, excellent students. But I find that the good law clerks were good students. I mean, that may be some exceptions to that, but academic achievement and thinking about the law demonstrated in a good law school teaches students how to think in terms of principle, moral principles, and so on. And so the use simply of computers, I don't think interrupts that too much. But it is different.
Do you use a computer either for word processing or for research?
Yeah, every now and then. I usually tell my lawyer, go see what the cases are, and if they don't find what I think is probably there, just guessing, then I may go do it another way. But
and how about your operation between Nashville and Cincinnati? Is that affected by technology?
No, well, the library system, the federal judiciary is now doing away with books very, very gradually, because you got a lot of older judges like me who like the books and don't want to get rid of their books. But sooner or later, 20, 30, 40 years from now, there are going to be very few books, I think.
Moving to the question of workload, there's sometimes judges aren't appointed as quickly as one hopes, and the caseload seems to be growing.
Yeah.
How do judges generally manage the workload, and is it really, really much increased from when you began as a judge?
Yeah, it's increased substantially. The numbers of cases have 1,277 to about 7,000 in our court now, and the numbers of judges gone from 9 to 16. So there's been a much less increase in the numbers of judges, but it shouldn't be one-for-one increase anyway. The judges are working very hard because of the volume of cases. The problem is that before you start, you don't know whether a case is chaff or wheat, and you have to do things to separate the chaff from the wheat, and a lot of cases now, much more than times past, are frivolous for any number of reasons. But you can't just guess at that, or you shouldn't just guess at it. And so the judges have got a lot of work to do, and they're very heavily dependent on their clerks. And I think more dependent, there's too much writing, too much thinking by clerks and to take the place of thinking by judges. But that is a necessity of the situation that judges have. And as judges get more experience, it's easier for them to do the work, but still in all, there's a huge big volume for, now that's not so much true of the district courts, but it is the courts of appeal. In my situation, it's different because I'm a senior judge and I'm doing about a half of a caseload. I've stayed on the death penalty docket. I do about 5 or 6 death penalty cases a year. They take a lot of time, much more time than usually any other kind of case except the exceptional case. And I depend on my clerks to go through a lot of things and tell me what appears to be the problem. I try then to, make sure that we haven't missed something. But the clerks are very valuable. They do a lot of writing too. But I have pared down my caseload to a point where I don't think I'm overloaded, and have some time for vacation and travel since I'm 75 years old, and yet enough time, I'm probably working 75% of the time, that I used to work. And I think, I've pared it down so I think I can do a competent job, but it's different from what it was before. And then before, I was chief judge for a number of years. I was in charge of the Judicial Conference Executive Committee, which was a lot of work. And I was working much harder than I am now. Thank God for not having to work that hard.
So what else do you do?
Well, I do a lot of things. Play a little golf. I have a girlfriend companion, Martha Ingram. She and I, this summer, have been to Europe for 3 weeks, London, and then a trip on the Rhine, and then to New England for 10 days. She's got a big boat, and so we're having a good time. Life is not bad.
And do you read?
Oh yeah, I'm addicted. Somebody asked me, have you ever been addicted to anything? And I say, yeah, I'm addicted to reading.
Tell us a couple of things that you've been particularly interested in lately.
Well, let's see. I guess I got a new book, the Nicomachean Ethics by Aristotle, which is a brand new translation with a long chapter by these scholars, and I'm finding that it's not as good as I thought it would be. But anyway, I'm going to read it. I read a good bit. There's a guy named Sandlin, who is a philosophy professor at Harvard, who's very popular, and he's written several books. I read a couple of his books recently. They're basically books on moral and political philosophy. And I think it's important for judges and others to have some vision of what they believe philosophically about human affairs. And so those things are interesting to me. Then I just got through reading 1861 by a guy named, Goodhart. It's about the first year of the Civil War, and it reads like a novel. It's a really fascinating book. I just not long ago read, it's a guy named Fukuyama, who has written a book on the origins of the political order, which is a pretty substantial book, about how the political order was created from the time of tribalism and hunter-gatherers up through the present, and he emphasizes a lot of things, one of which is how we got the rule of law, which he thinks is the ultimate development. But anyway, so I don't read. I read a lot of novels and poetry in college. I don't read as much of that, more nonfiction. But Martha gets me every now and then to read a novel. She reads a lot too.
So we've talked about the changes in the law practice, and one of those changes has been a building of diversity in law practice. That is, when you began law practice, there were very few, if any, African Americans and very few women. What do you think the result is in general for the increasing diversity in the law practice and in judging?
Well, I think the diversity, by and large, is a good thing. I'm one who believes that in this country there's not sufficient amount of equality. I agree with the Europeans to some extent about that. Some in our country says, well, that's just, welfare state and people don't take care of themselves and so on. But I think diversity is one aspect of increasing equality, which is a good in itself. Don't have to have a justification further than equality is a good thing in itself. Women particularly have brought a different perspective to some extent. Women, are somewhat more idealistic, I think. and not quite. Now, that's not all women. And I mean, I could think of a few would be exceptions to that. But anyway, I think that women have had a harder time coming up. That may become a time when that's no longer true. And they are more empathetic, altruistic in general, and more idealistic. That's good for society. So the consequences of that diversity, in addition to it being a good in itself, is positive. I think there can be in women sometimes a political correctness that can go overboard a little bit and can be ultra feminism that is counterproductive and probably is in some ways sometimes a denial of equality, you know. So there hadn't been much harm in that respect, but it's possible that women then want to exclude others from things just like men did. I mean, we're all human beings, and there tends to be we're all Homo sapiens, I should say, and we have the evolutionary instincts that are not entirely benign. So, but anyway, I think by and large it's great.
So we're going to finish up in just a couple of minutes. I have a couple of final questions. One, is there anything that you would like particularly to say about your life in the law, about your experience as a judge, or anything that we haven't asked you about that you would like to just tell us?
No, I don't know. I can't. My life in the law has been almost entirely positive. And I am happy that I am now a judge and don't have to retire, and that I can do, because the work continues to be challenging, and I wish that used to be true of lawyers. They didn't retire much. That's changed to some extent, and I think the legal profession has improved in many ways, diversity being the main way, but it has this ultra specialization and ultra overzealousness to represent a client, and not so much to do justice, but to whatever is necessary, has had a detrimental effect. Over specialization. And I think the fees that some lawyers are charging, particularly in the big money centers, are outrageous, and they, emanate kind of from Wall Street and total greed, and that needs to be monitored and changed. But I think the legal profession, by and large, is doing fine, and I'm glad I chose to do, looking back on it, what I chose to do.
So, as a closing question, what advice would you give to young lawyers, people who are just graduating and coming into the profession?
It's a tough day, and the toughest day during my lifetime for the legal profession, because the supply and demand curve for lawyers has changed, or appears to be changing, and that it's much more difficult to get into some area of the law that will challenge your soul as well as your mind and your pocketbook, and try to think through a way you can do that either pro bono or working in a smaller firm or doing something that will help you improve as a human being.
Thank you very much, Judge Merritt.
Okay.